I personally find it very disrespectful to American taxpayers that this White House would seize on the comment of a progressive Washington Post columnist and declare that the $3.5 trillion spending package actually costs nothing. Now, the reason they say it costs nothing is because they're raising your taxes to pay for it, so it adds nothing to the debt or the deficit. So they can claim it costs nothing. It costs you money. Now, I realize if you're a progressive and you're listening to me right now, you're saying, but wait, they told us that they were only going to raise taxes on people who make $400,000 a year or more. Unless you're a smoker, and the majority of smokers in this country make less than that, and they're going to raise $989 billion in taxes with a tobacco tax increase that will directly impact the poor. But they would have you believe that it costs nothing. I find it disrespectful, and I realize that in Common Core math, people can say things like this, but really, Common Core math makes people add in weird ways. But even in Common Core math, I don't think you can take $3.5 trillion and convert it to zero with nothing. But this is the talking point the left has seized on, the White House has seized on. Catherine Rampell of the Washington Post was on one of the Sunday shows and tried to argue it this way.
There are so many things, but I think my number one priority would be more discussion of what's actually in the bill, as opposed to this top line figure, which itself is misleading, of $3.5 trillion. There are good ways to spend a huge sum of money. There are bad ways to spend a huge sum of money. But the kind of media coverage that we've been getting doesn't really explore whether the kinds of things that are in this bill are meritorious or not. I'd love to see more people commenting about, should we invest in childcare this way or paid leave that way or in climate? Instead, It's about the number.
About the number. Well, of course it's about the number. It's $3.5 trillion. They've already spent $5 trillion on COVID. So it's an additional $3.5 trillion in addition to the bipartisan infrastructure bill. That's $1.5 trillion. So you got $5 trillion plus $5 trillion. That's $10 trillion unless you're in the White House. And they say that it costs nothing. This is Joe Biden now tweeting out that his plan costs nothing, that it's paid for. They don't want to talk about the number. This is all coordinated with the press. Here's Nancy Pelosi.
So again, the Senate and the House, those who are not in full agreement with the president's right, let's see what our value, let's not talk about numbers and dollars. Let's talk about values.
Right. And now Jen Psaki is officially taking this from the White House press secretary's briefing.
There's not disagreement about the fundamentals of what we're trying to achieve. And there is agreement that we need to address the climate crisis, that we need to cut costs for childcare, for college, that we need to make it easier for women to rejoin the workforce. We need to rebuild and modernize our infrastructure. So there's agreement on that. There's a basic discussion that needs to happen or is ongoing. We're right in the weeds of it now on what the size of the package looks like. But I will also note, and we've done this a little bit over the past couple of days, but that this package, the reconciliation package, would cost $0. So what I'm saying, the case we're making here is that there needs to be agreement on the different components. There's broad agreement on the goals. And then there needs to be agreement on what the revenue pay-fors are.
It would cost $0. This is the White House, actually, a $3.5 trillion package, and they're saying it costs nothing. And no, it costs it when your taxes go up. And to get to that point, you've got to listen to this further exchange with Jen Psaki.
I want to ask you about what Republicans are pointing to in the analysis from the Joint Committee on Taxation. They say, according to, if I've read the chart correctly, more than 16% of taxpayers would see their taxes increase under the bill that's approved by the House Ways and Means Committee. Will the president sign that bill as it is coming out of that committee, or will he insist on the changes so that he will maintain his commitment that taxes won't go up on people making $400,000 a year?
I have not looked at the document or the report that you have put out. Obviously, the president, or that you have referenced, I should say, that the Republicans put out. Obviously, the president's commitment remains not raising taxes for anyone making less than $400,000 a year. There are some, and I'm not sure if this is the case in this report, who argue that in the past, companies have passed on these costs to consumers. I'm not sure if that's the argument being made in this report. We feel that that's unfair and absurd, and the American people would not stand for that. But I will take a closer look at this report and get you a more substantive response. Go ahead, Jack.
It's absurd and unfair if an American company raises its prices to maintain its profit margin. That's what happens every time. It's the Democrats arguing against reality right now. Have they just forgotten how this works? Apparently, they have forgotten how this works. When you have a small business, let's say a restaurant, you have a restaurant. Your restaurant is now having to pay higher wages. Its food costs have gone up, and its profit margin has gone from a 15% profit margin, and that's being generous for a restaurant, down to 10%. And now its taxes are going to go up as well. So what does the restaurant do? What does the restaurant do? You know, its owners have a financial incentive through the profit margin to keep the business open. When the profit margin goes away, they don't just keep the business open out of the goodness of their heart because they're not making any money. They got to feed their family. So what do? They raise prices. They pass the cost on to the consumer to maintain the 10% profit margin. That's actually a small profit margin. You know what Apple's profit margin is off of an iPhone? Good gracious. Apple can afford it. It's $1 trillion company. Your small business is not. The fact that the Democrats don't seem to understand this, or they want to, I think they actually do. They're just trying to hope that you don't understand it. This is part of the problem that they're dealing with. And part of this talking point has to do with Kyrsten Sinema. Kyrsten Sinema is the senator from Arizona, Democrat, who is not down with the tax increases. What the Democrats are having to try to do is say, this costs nothing, Kyrsten, vote for it. This costs nothing, except it does. It may be paid for, and so in reconciliation, it does not add to the deficit, but that does not mean it's free. Each item has a price, and that price must be adjusted based on a tax increase or a cut somewhere else. They want to also give a tax break to the richest among us. They want to restore SALT, and that's complicating their negotiations. SALT is the state and local tax deduction. So you take all the taxes you pay at the state and local level, and you deduct those in your federal income tax. The Republicans have capped it at about $40,000. Democrats had an unlimited amount in the tax code prior to the Trump tax reform. So if you paid $100,000 in taxes in New York, you got to deduct 100% of that money from your federal taxes, and many times you then wound up paying no federal taxes. And the result was that you never really had to appreciate or understand your state tax burden because it was offset with a federal tax deduction. The Republicans got rid of it, and it caused a mass flight of wealthy people out of New York and California as a result, because suddenly they had to live with the consequences of their votes and higher taxes. Democrats want to restore that tax break. And by the way, it is exclusively a tax cut for the rich. And the Democrats want to give that tax cut for the rich. And they are okay raising taxes on the wealthy so long as they then give them their offsetting tax deduction that mitigates some of the tax increase. But you're not going to get the tax break if you smoke. They want to raise the taxes on tobacco, cigars, and cigarettes. They want to raise the taxes on alcohol. They also want to raise taxes on meat. Now, remember, when the Biden administration came in, they said that there was a big report out that the Biden administration itself circulated showing that we need to convert Americans to vegetarianism in order to save the climate and save the planet. And when it turned out that that meant raising costs on beef, pork, and poultry, the Biden administration, we're not really going to do that. And now it turns out they are. If you're a farmer, you need to listen to this. One of the items in the reconciliation package is a tax on cow farts, and I'm not making that up. It is real. The methane emissions per head of cattle. If you own a dairy cow, under the Democrats' reconciliation plan, you will annually pay per cow $6,800, more than the value of the cow. You will pay $6,800 per cow if it's a dairy cow. If it is a cow for meat, it will be $3,500 per cow. They want to tax cow farts. They're going to raise the costs of eating meat through taxation. That's part of the Democrats' plan. I'm not making that up. I wish I were making that up, but I'm not. It's in the plan. So they will raise your costs to eat beef, pork, and poultry. Yes, there's a tax on chickens and a tax on pigs as well. The highest is on cows. They will raise the cost of eating meat, which again is a tax on poor people. Do you really believe that the beef, poultry, and pork producers will not pass that cost on to you? Do you really believe that? There's no law that says they can, and the Democrats aren't pushing a law saying they can't. So of course they are, and who can blame them? They do have employees to pay. They do have profits to maintain for their shareholders. The Democrats want you to believe that they're not raising your costs, they're raising the costs of the farmer. The farmer is going to raise your costs to offset his costs. It's the way the world has always worked. And only now are the Democrats deciding that they no longer have to contend with reality. They can make it up and fuel the world on unicorn farts, and that's not going to get them very far.